My understanding is that Andrew's not here tonight, and some of folks from his class are in here. And I'll apologize to you from the beginning. I cannot talk as fast as he can, so I will do my best to try to keep up with his pace. But Andrew does have that ability to talk rather rapidly. For those of you that weren't with us, I take the first couple of minutes and to review what we did on the last time. And if we just let ourselves be happy with something as simple as flood geology, which allows us to harmonize with Scripture, the age of the earth, we would have been okay. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. We think about what's going out on the world, and we looked at a lot of the theories that people in the world are talking about, with the gap theory probably being the most prevalent of those theories. But in fact, even with the gap theory, we find that there is a beginning. And we as Christians know exactly what that beginning was, because we were told in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created. So we know the answer to the question that these people have yet to find an answer to. And it would have been okay, but what do we have to do? We've got to fall into the same bracket and come up with a bunch of different alternatives to being a Christian and still allowing evolution to take place. So there are a number of theories that we talked about, and I've just put these up there to remind you of those theories. The one that we probably spent the longest time on was, what is the word day in Genesis 1 and 2 and in the rest of the Scripture? And we pointed out that as long as there's a number in front of it, there can be little doubt that it's talking about a 24-hour day. We read the entire book, or not the entire book, but Genesis chapter 1. And if we viewed it as a seventh grader would look at it when we are reading Genesis, it's quite obvious that it's a 7-day, 24-hour day that's being talked about. And in Exodus 20 and 11, we're actually told, are we not, it is said that in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth and the seas and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. And I pointed out that one of the bases for this is the Israelites would understand a 7-day cycle, a 24-hour, 7-day cycle, and that God was telling them through Moses, you work for 6 days, and then on the Sabbath you rest. And that was pointed out. God tells the people, remember and keep the Sabbath, and he tells them how to keep the Sabbath later on, and the people can tell when they are keeping the Sabbath if they are resting on the seventh day. And that kind of brought us to that conclusion that in our mind there's no doubt that the days in Genesis chapter 1 are 24-hour days, and we went through a lot more detail last week. And then in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, we pointed out that there's a change in the pronoun before God. God is a plural word in the Hebrew, and he says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and then he switches over in verse 20 into his own image in verse 27. And so we can see the fact that early on we pointed out that in John chapter 1, what do we know? In the beginning, the Word was, and the Word was Jesus. So we know that it's the multiplicity who it is, but that would be difficult for the Jews who were very, very monotheistic, as we are monotheistic, but we understand the Trinity. And for those of you that have been at the 2 sessions that Don taught on the Holy Spirit, you know how the Holy Spirit fits into this. So this evening, what we want to talk about is what happened when we were thrown out of the garden. When Eve listened to the serpent and the serpent changed that one word, not, which was not in God's instruction. You will surely not die. What happened? Well, we know that God evicted Adam and Eve and then put guards on the garden to keep them out. So was all of this that he did, that human body that he gave us, was it by accident, or is there some kind of design involved in it? And in Psalms 139 and verse 14, and understand those that you were in the ladies class last Thursday will know all of this because you had a little bit of information related to this particular passage. So bear with me, the ladies that were there. The rest of you weren't there, so it'll be a little bit different for you. So it says in Psalms 139:14, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Well, what does made imply to you? What does that imply to you if I say something is made? Somebody's making an airplane, or at least you guys are trying to make an airplane. Right, Joe? Who's doing it? Whoever has bought into this project. So made signifies that somebody is behind it, a maker. The law of teleology is where there's design, there must be a designer, and the nature of design has to do with who it is that is actually behind it, the artist, the functional purpose of it. If I showed you that picture, what would you say to me? What pops into your head? Leonardo da Vinci. He painted this. I will have to tell you a side story. We were in the Louvre about a year or so ago, and my wife was on crutches, and she was taken right up to the front to stand in front of it, and she wouldn't go. And the rest of us were standing out there wondering why she wouldn't go, because I could have followed with her if she'd have gone, but she didn't. But anyway, there's a maker, a painting, whatever, an airplane. There's somebody behind it. And it's able to replace itself. When we think about biological life, it has the capability of metabolism. That is, it can take in food materials and break them down into some type of energy so that we have the muscle, the ability to speak. It all takes energy. Just like any other machine, the human body requires energy. It can experience true growth, multiplication of cells, and it's able to reproduce itself. And when we think about animal life, we can add to it, it can respond to external stimuli, and it's capable of autonomous movement. Now, when we get into the plant world, some of these things aren't there, but the others indeed are there. And the law of biogenics says that life comes only from life. And very early on, I showed you Pasteur's very early 1800 experiment in which he showed that you had to have life to get more life. And that if you kept life out of his culture medium, you got no growth, but if something out of the air got into it, you got growth. So the biblical view of the human body, a blind natural force, or was it divinely designed? And I think Genesis 2:7 and Psalms 139 answer those questions for us. Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That's the Creator. By simply breathing life into man, we have this first living being. And then in Psalms, we read, I will give thanks to you, for I am grateful and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. And when we think about the depth of the earth, I think that's a term for the womb. And when we think about skillfully wrought, that same word is used for tapestry that is beautifully embroidered in the temple. And that's what God did for us in the womb. He made us beautifully what we were to be. So we go on and say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And when we think about the body of all life that God has put on earth, it's pretty similar. Whether it's a bacterium, whether it's a plant, whether it's a dog or a cat or a human. But when we look at the human body itself, we know that it is designed with a particular and specific purpose in mind. And that is, as we'll see, as we've seen in Genesis, that man was put on this earth to control, to manage nature, to reproduce, and to spread throughout the world. And we'll see that not all of that happened as we get further into Genesis. There are 4 levels of organization, going from the smallest to the largest: the cell, the tissue, the organ, and then the whole system. Now, when we think about the physical body, it has been marvelously designed and intricately organized. Think about the body, and we're going to talk about some details, and I'm going to ask you to bear with me because some of it is a little deep, but I'll try my best to simplify it. But when we think about the body that we have, and we're sitting down and talking with people who believe in evolution, that we evolved from not just a single cell, but we evolved out of kind of a mesh that was out in the universe, and that gradually somehow became a single cell, and that single cell somehow grew into a larger cell, and somehow we're going from asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction, and we have much bigger and larger animals that are populating the earth, if you're looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint. But we always want to take ourselves back to Genesis and remember that God was the one who created everything, including men. And for the purpose of facilitating human existence upon the earth, we were designed to be that creature that was the ultimate crafting of God's design. Well, when you think about the human cell, we've got somewhere between 600 billion and what does it say, 100 trillion cells. These are numbers that really are stagnating from my standpoint, not stagnating, but very, very large numbers. But we have a tremendous number of cells. Just our brain alone has 30 billion cells. There are different types and shapes, and this is where I'm getting Mark to help me out. Not Mark down here, but Mark up here. Turn around and look, Mark, or look down at the bottom. What cell's that? A red blood cell. Very good. This one? A muscle cell. How about that one? That's an easy one. A nerve cell? Been a long time since you've had histology. That's a liver cell, and then that's a kidney cell. So you can see within our own body the diversity is there. Now, how did all this evolve? Each of these different cell types with different functions, did they evolve one at a time? Well, you can't function with just a liver without a kidney, because all you do is build up waste, and they didn't have dialysis in those days. You got to have all of these cells, whether it's a muscle cell, a red blood cell, a nerve cell, a liver cell, or a kidney cell. And cells have 3 major structures. When we go back to the individual cell, the membrane, the cytoplasm, and the nucleus. Big words. All they say is that a cell looks like this. And that outside thing, the fence around your backyard, is the cell membrane. Inside is the grass, the cytoplasm. And then even further in is your wife, the nucleus, that individual that runs the household. So we've got the fence, the yard, and the nucleus. Very, very simple as we think about this complex situation. And this is just a picture of a cell, very diagrammatic, kind of a cartoon. And the thing that we want to focus on is that little center thing up in your right-hand corner that says nucleus. That's where all of the information that God originally programmed is stored. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But you can see that outside blue is the membrane. All of that other stuff between the membrane and the nucleus is the cytoplasm, and then the nucleus is that center thing. Now, within the nucleus is where we have the information that makes us what we are. It makes us a boy or a girl. It determines whether or not we're going to have early on baldness in men, whether our eyes are blue or green or gray. All of this is programmed in that material known as the chromosome. And within the chromosome itself are these things that we call DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. You've all heard that big word, just DNA. That's the code that God laid out when He created us and He created all mankind. Because we're going to find that about 90+%, 80+% of the DNA that you have, a worm has. So it's common throughout all species with one exception. Did any of you have COVID? Anybody in this room get COVID? Well, that's an RNA virus, which is totally different because it's not a DNA, but it's an RNA, and you have to get into the human body or some other organism and attach to that DNA to be able to reproduce yourself. So we've got our chromosome. It's a long, thread-like body consisting of proteins and this deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. We have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs that we get, 23 from you, 23 from you, and your kids then have that kind of amalgamation of the protein. Females have 2 X chromosomes, and males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. And this wasn't known until probably the 1700s. So it's the dad's fault if you have all girls or all boys. That's a chromosome. That's a typical map of the chromosomes of a human. You see the XY, so that makes this person a what? This makes up this person what? A male, because it's an XY. And then there's that chromosome with all of that genetic material inside of it. As I said, this is the hereditary material that we have in all of the species out there: plants, worms, microbes, monkeys, dogs. Most of it is in that nucleus. But there's a small amount of DNA in one of the organelles within the cell, the mitochondria. And that's the engine, my good engineering friends, that's the engine that makes the energy that allows us to move our arms, to do whatever we're going to do. There's a small amount in the mitochondria. It's stored as 4 basic chemicals. And you don't need to worry about what they are, but there are 4 basic chemicals that God used to write the alphabet for this DNA that I'm going to show you now. The human DNA, there are 3 billion bases, and more than 99% were all the same. Our DNA is about 99% the same. And the sequence of the bases determines the information available for building and for maintaining the organism. It's very much like the letters of the alphabet in specific orders to form words and sentences. How many letters do we have in our alphabet? 26. We've got 4 letters in the Lord's alphabet for DNA. So just keep that in mind. Now this is kind of schematically trying to show you that typically adenine and thymine pair together and guanine and cytosine pair together. And they're attached to a sugar molecule and a phosphate molecule, and they make up the double helix. It's sort of like the base legs forming the ladder's image, and then the sugars and the phosphates form the side of the ladder. So if you look at it in that very simple way, you have the cross part being the adenine, guanine, and cytosine, and then the sugars and phosphates make up the outside of the ladder. And that's just a picture of it to show you. You can see the adenine and thymine going into the center. And it's in that chromosome, all packed within the nucleus. And this is the machinery, which I won't go into, as to how the DNA is used. But the interesting thing is a single strand of DNA. Remember, we've got millions, billions, maybe trillions of cells. And a single strand from one cell is about 6 feet long. Now you think about evolution finding a way to compact in such a small area 6 feet. That's pretty long, 6 feet. Now if you take all of our cells, we'll take them from you.
Thank you.
We'll take all of your DNA and we stretch that from end to end. We can reach to the moon or the sun and back 100 times. That's all packed into all the cells that are in the body. But a single cell has something that's 6 feet long. Again, this defies the concept of evolution. This DNA can replicate and make copies of itself. Remember, what did God tell the people to do? To reproduce themselves, to multiply. And DNA can do this. And it's critical when cells divide because each new cell needs to make a perfect copy of itself. So when you read DNA, it's really pretty simple. Your DNA and the DNA of every organism, I've said, is made up of these 4 bases, and the code is read in sequence of 3. Remember, there are 4 bases that we're concerned about, but we read them in units of 3. And we've known about this since about 1955, 1960. This is all relatively new stuff. One of the guys that got the Nobel Prize, Watson, just recently died. He was 25, 26 when he was involved with the discovery of all of this. It's very similar to the way our alphabet works. We have 26 letters in our alphabet. We have 4 in God's alphabet. And they read the following. Oh, let's just look at these 2 sentences. The big cat ate the fat rat. That's a pretty simple sentence, isn't it? The big fat cat ate the fat rat. Let's just change one letter. Is that okay? Let's change that to a B. And what do we have now? The big bat ate the fat rat. And that's all we're doing when we're reading DNA. We're just reading it in units of 3. But if we change one thing, one little thing, look at the difference. We're not a cat, but we're a bat. One letter in our code was changed, but the meaning of the sentence has changed, and the same is true for our DNA. In order for DNA to be read and to reproduce itself, it has to open up. So every time a cell turns over, and we have literally millions of cells, while you're sitting here, cells are turning over, and they're turning over, and every time they turn over, they're making new DNA. And as they go down, they can make mistakes. Anybody in here ever done proofreading? It's not easy, is it? Even with proofreading, occasionally you make mistakes. Occasionally we'll see mistakes can be made here. So here's just a very simple example. One person, we're reading across. Remember, we read in units of 3. And the second person, the only difference is GGG is now AGG. That's no big deal. That's just one little nucleotide change. But what happens when we change the C in cat to a B gives a very different image, just like changing the G in a person gives us a different person. And as I've said, all of this boils down to, the color of our skin, the color of our hair, the color of our eyes. And as we think about this, reading DNA, so let's first do it in English. That's a cat, and that's a bat. But in DNA, this stands for glycine, and this stands for arginine. Now, there's another little detail here that's not important to you, but we have 21 amino acids that make up all the proteins in our body, and we have to get them mostly from the food. There's some that we can synthesize ourselves. And so this reading that we're doing in the DNA is going out and telling us what protein we need to make so that our muscles will work or whatever that protein is designed to do. So here we are now with this kind of sequence. Here's our DNA of person A, and you see the G there. And here's our person B with the DNA, and there's just that slight change. One little change. But remember, cat, or was it a cat? Mouse to a rat, whatever it was. It was just one little word change too. And this can be devastating when this happens. And this is just the whole sequence of the protein that's involved. And you can see that in line 8, the G switched to R. And it doesn't really seem like a big deal, does it? All of that information there, and we just changed one little thing. Not a big deal, right? It is a big deal. But if you're a cat, you aren't a bat and you can't fly. And if you have R instead of G, the results can be very, very drastic and dynamic. This individual, with that one small change, suffers from a form of dwarfism. Just one tiny little change. in the DNA, programming the proteins, results in such a significant change. Let me just stop here. And I know I've talked a lot of stuff that's firsthand to me, and it just comes out like I know what I'm talking about, which I may not know what I'm talking about, but I fooled you, I'm pretty sure. Does anybody have any questions or comments or issues where we are right now? The thing I want you to remember is that we've got this wonderful, magnificent system that God created in the very beginning. He gave everything to everyone as a code, a very simple code that's the DNA. And it's embedded in our chromosomes. And every species out there has a number of chromosomes. We happen to have 46. A monkey has something else. A squirrel has something else. But we all have chromosomes. We all have the DNA entangled in that chromosome. And when we bring it out and we have changes, and all the time our skin is fluffing off. I mean, you ladies know about this. You put all kinds of cream on that to help that. Well, every time it sloughs off, you got to have a new cell. And every time that cell is produced, it goes through this process of opening up the DNA where there's that possibility of not being replicated correctly. And it only takes one tiny little change to cause a very significant problem. One small change in DNA, one dynamic effect on the person. Who wrote the original program? It wasn't Bill Clinton, even though he has a book out called God's Language. It was God, and he told us that in Genesis chapter 1. And the same thing holds for the DNA, that he put it into every living system, whether it's a tree, a fish, a frog, a human. And then the Lord said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." So he drove them out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he stationed these two angels to prevent Adam and Eve and from us going back into the garden. Now, I don't know if this is when this happened, but I'm making the assumption that God said when he created man, it was very good, and I'm assuming he created him perfect. So a lot of this problems that we have with DNA today may not have existed in the garden. I don't know that for sure, but that's an assumption I'm making. Now we've been thrown out of the garden, and we're out there to face the world. And a lot of things happen, and we've gone through a variety of different approaches to evolution. But as you look at this picture, every single one of us, 99% of our DNA is the same. Well, why do we look so different? Why do we act so differently? Why do we have different color of eyes? Well, I've just explained to you why. It's what we call polymorphisms. These are just small changes in that DNA. And I'm just going to give you a very quick example of what we were talking about. We can add them, we can take them away, we can put them back. Anybody in here red, green, colorblind? Unusual for a group this large, so it's not a problem. You'll be able to see these numbers, and basically, remember we said we read these in units of 3, and if we add a different color, or if we move the colors around, or we take away a color, or if we add another color, these are just little simple things that will make that long thread of DNA be read differently. And these are the polymorphisms, and I'm not going to... How many of you use artificial sweeteners? This is an artificial sweetener. It has aspartame in it, and it also has a warning label on it. Phenylketonuria, be aware because it contains phenylalanine. And the issue is the phenylalanine that makes up part of the aspartame molecule. And basically, about 1 in 10,000 people are response to the fact that they get a buildup of the phenylalanine, and it's very, very simple Mendelian genetics. This guy was back in the 1600s, and he did all of this that we're talking about now in peas, in different colors of peas. And it's basically if mom and dad are carriers, then one of the offspring will be PKU sensitive and not be able to handle phenylalanine. And it's just a slide that shows this, and it can be devastating even to the point of being severely compromising in pregnancy. Well, we'll just take the next few minutes and talk about both chromosomal disorders and genetic disorders. And as I said, I don't know if they existed in the garden. My assumption is they probably didn't. But when we got thrown out of the garden, we had all kinds of issues that take place. We know that there are about 600 known genetic disorders. They're caused by changes in the chromosome itself or in genetic mutations, and about 1 in 50 people are affected by some known single-cell disorder. This may be red-green color blindness or something else. Now, in the case of the chromosomes, we have normally 23 and 23, and these are the big terms for more than the appropriate number or less than the appropriate number. And when we think about that, Down syndrome is a classic example where there's an extra chromosome on chromosome 21. And about 1 in 700 live babies in the U.S. Are afflicted this way. Turner syndrome, this is very, very special because it's only women are the only ones that can get this particular syndrome, and it's about 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 2,500 in the U.S. population, and this basically says they don't have the second chromosome. A lot of things can damage our DNA, and this is why I think that maybe this came about after we're out of the garden, because in the garden we were totally protected. We were walking, Adam and Eve were walking and talking with the Lord in a protected environment. We're now out in a world where all kinds of things. Those of us that live in Florida, I think you've had a number of basal cell carcinomas. That's just nothing but the sun, X-ray causing a mutation, and you get these basal cell carcinomas coming up. Fortunately, I don't think anybody's had a melanoma yet that I know about. Those are the bad ones. Even in the eye, you can get a melanoma. And again, that's a genetic alteration that can take place. When we think about the fact that so many cells are turning over so often, so rapidly, and we have to repair them and copyright them to be sure that we haven't made a mistake, it's amazing that we don't have more of these mutations taking place. When you think about the 3 billion base pairs that are copied every time a human cell replicates, you would expect more mistakes than actually happen. I mean, God has given us a wonderful repair system. When we make a mistake, there's just all kinds of systems that are there to repair the DNA, to kill cells that are improperly passed on. Just so many things that He's put in to help us. But we do have these types of incorrectly paired nucleotides that can escape proofreading and repair, and they can cause spontaneous damage. And this is just the red-green color blindness. It's a recessive link X-linked on the X chromosome, which is why it affects males more often than females. Mitochondrial disorder, this can only occur in females because it's passed with the mitochondrial DNA that I told you there was a small amount there. And you can see the type of, it takes, if a female has it, it's going to pass on. If a male happened to be a carrier, it's not going to pass on. Sickle cell anemia it affects a large population of Afro-Americans, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. You see a large number of that. And it basically, if you have two carriers, one of the four offspring will actually have sickle cell anemia. Now, most mutations are neutral or harmful, but there are a couple of examples where they're actually beneficial. And the bottom one has to do with sickle cell anemia. In these African populations, huge amount of malaria, and people with sickle cell anemia are refractive to malaria, where other people are not. And in the other case, we're talking about HIV, making them resistant to HIV. Now, just very, very briefly, without any hesitation, we throw out macroevolution. But I think you've seen that microevolution occurs. We're getting these mutations. We're not getting new species. We're just getting alterations within our species or within other species. Very, very much used in agriculture for crop breeding. You can use genetic mutations by going in and putting in a gene from a bacterium into corn that makes it more resistant to cold. There are all kinds of things that you can do with this type of technology. So microevolution does take place, and I think you can see down at the bottom, it's quite obvious in the case of macroevolution, we're not going from a rock to the human, and we can see that A, B, and C are just different types of dogs, and the banana is the odd character out. We've got about half a minute. I just want to speak very, very briefly about transgender. That's something that is really occurring within our population. And there is no genetic basis for transgender. God made us either a male or a female at birth by the chromosomes that He gave to us. And what I want to just point out is it's really growing rapidly, unfortunately, in our country, particularly in the case of children. And just to remind ourselves, adolescent brains don't develop. The brain doesn't develop until we're about 24, 25, or 26, and it's primarily in the hippocampus, that front lobe, and that's where logic and reasoning come about. And so when we start trying to convince people too early, we can get ourselves in problems. The point I want to just point out is God must have known that this was going to happen, because what did Philip say to the Ethiopian eunuch when he said, "What prevents me from being baptized?" There's water. Philip took him down into the water and baptized him. The point I'm making is that if we do find ourselves faced with repentant transgenic people, we need to treat them like Philip treated the Ethiopian eunuch. And I think we're at the end. They're trying to get in, so we'll stop here. We're out of doing all of the background material. We start with Genesis chapter 2, not Wednesday because it's a song service, but Genesis chapter 2 next Sunday. Okay, thank you very much.